Darius Cole walked into the gala, thinking he was sealing a $900 million deal, until the billionaire hosting it mistook him for the help. The crowd laughed, cameras flashed, and his dignity was stripped in seconds. But what none of them knew was that Darius carried a secret that could bring their entire empire crashing down. And when he opened his mouth, the room would never forget his name. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The glass chandeliers above the ballroom glittered like frozen constellations, pouring golden light across marble floors, polished to a mirror's shine. The annual Manhattan Children's Futures Gala was the kind of event that made headlines the next morning, an exclusive gathering where the wealthiest families, politicians and magnates paraded their fortunes under the guise of philanthropy. Security had sealed off 2 city blocks, rows of black cars lined the streets. Inside, an orchestra played classical arrangements as uniformed servers floated between guests, carrying trays of champagne. Into this world of whispered power and old money stepped Darius Cole. At 36, Darius was already a name. Wall Street analyst, debated in hushed tones, founder and CEO of Cole Dynamics. He had built an empire in renewable technologies, solar grids, sustainable infrastructure, clean water systems, that turned him into a multi-billionaire before his 40th birthday. Yet wealth alone had never granted him full acceptance. Even as journalists hailed him as the future of American enterprise, there lingered an unspoken question among circles like this one. Did he truly belong here, or was he merely visiting a kingdom that would never be his? Darius walked into the ballroom, with a posture of quiet strength, wearing a tailored black tuxedo, his expression neutral but alert. Every detail about him was deliberate. Shoes polished to glass, cufflinks understated, ties simple. He had learned long ago that the smallest detail could be twisted into a stereotype if he wasn't careful. The whispers began almost instantly. "Is he staff?" a woman murmured, eyes narrowing as she clutched her pearl necklace. "Must have taken a wrong turn," another man muttered, his smile sharp enough to cut. A waiter carrying champagne flutes slowed, tilting the tray toward Darius, as if offering him one. But the man's tone betrayed the assumption. "You late? We're short a server in the West Hall." Darius's jaw tightened. He looked the waiter directly in the eye, then lifted a glass, not to serve but to sip. He let the silence linger just long enough for the man's face to redden with embarrassment before moving on. He had been here before. Different faces, different rooms, same prejudice wrapped in silk. Tonight, however, was not about enduring it. Tonight was about history. Darius was minutes away from finalizing a $900 million partnership with the Langston family, a dynasty that controlled shipping lines, banks, and real estate across the eastern seaboard. The deal was set to merge Cole Dynamics' cutting-edge technology with Langston Global's distribution empire, creating the largest renewable infrastructure project in U.S. history. For Darius, it wasn't just business. It was legacy, a contract that would cement his place in circles determined to keep him on the margins. He spotted them across the ballroom, the Langston family, glowing like royalty. Charles Langston Sr., the patriarch, stood tall in a tailored white dinner jacket, flanked by his children, Charles Jr. and Victoria, both heirs to the empire. Guests hovered near them with reverence, like planets orbiting a sun. Darius felt the weight of eyes as he approached. Every step across the marble floor was met with hushed speculation. Does he belong here? Is he really one of us? Or just playing dress-up with borrowed power? He thought of his mother, working double shifts in Atlanta, just to keep the lights on, of the nights he studied by candlelight after their electricity had been cut. He thought of walking into venture capital meetings a decade earlier, ignored until he pulled out numbers no one could deny. Every insult, every dismissal, every door slammed in his face, had led him here. Still, the sting was real when a man in a navy tuxedo intercepted him with a polite smile that cut like a blade. "Restrooms are down that hall," he said, gesturing away from the Langstons. Darius didn't flinch. "Thank you," he replied coolly, and kept walking straight toward the family that believed they were doing him a favor by granting him entry to their world. The crowd began to part. Some smiled thinly, others pretended not to stare, but all eyes followed the black CEO as he crossed the floor to stand before Charles Langston Sr. The old man extended a hand with exaggerated warmth, his voice booming across the ballroom. "Well, well, the man of the hour. Ladies and gentlemen, this here is Darius Cole, the prodigy who climbed his way from, well, wherever it was he climbed from." Laughter rippled softly across the room. Darius smiled faintly, refusing to shrink. He reached for the handshake. Langston didn't let go immediately. He leaned closer, his breath hot with champagne, and said loudly enough for those nearby to hear, "You clean up well, son. For a second I thought you were part of the staff, nearly asked you to fetch my coat." The room erupted. Some guests laughed outright. Others gasped and covered their mouths. But the damage was done. The insult echoed beneath the chandeliers, amplifying the very stereotype Darius had spent his life outrunning. Cameras flashed, recording his frozen expression. The humiliation wasn't private. It was public, deliberate, and now immortalized. Darius's heart pounded in his chest. He forced a measured breath, his face betraying nothing, but inside the sting burned deeper than any insult he had ever endured. He wasn't just being mocked. He was being reduced in front of the very people who held the keys to his company's future. Across the room, Victoria Langston whispered something to her brother, smirking as they both glanced at Darius with the amusement of children watching a cruel prank. The music didn't stop. The orchestra played on. Waiters kept circulating. To the outside world, it was just another gala moment, another harmless joke. But to Darius, it was a reminder that no matter how much wealth or success he amassed, there would always be those determined to remind him of where they believed he belonged. And yet, beneath the humiliation, something stirred. Because Darius knew something no one else in that ballroom knew. Something about the Langston Empire that, if revealed, could shatter their dynasty in a single stroke. He had planned to stay silent, to sign the deal, to smile for the cameras. But in that instant, the decision became infinitely heavier. Would he swallow the insult to secure the deal of a lifetime? Or would he unleash the truth and risk everything? The ballroom waited for his response. And Charles Langston Sr., still gripping his hand, leaned back with a smile that wasn't a smile at all. "Don't take it personal, son. It's just a joke." But the way the crowd laughed, Darius knew it wasn't a joke. It was a test. Just as Langston prepared to raise his glass for a toast, his voice booming again across the room, he added one more line, a line that would turn every guest in that glittering ballroom against Darius in a single breath. The sound of laughter still rang in Darius's ears, but even as the ballroom blurred around him, his mind pulled backward away from chandeliers, away from tailored suits, back to a cracked apartment ceiling in Atlanta, where water stains mapped out a geography of struggle. He was 9 when he first realized how different his life was from the children around him. His mother, Evelyn Cole, worked 2 jobs, day shifts at the local hospital, as a nursing assistant, and overnight cleaning offices downtown. She would come home bone-tired, her hands raw from disinfectant, her back aching, but still manage a smile when she saw him hunched over homework at the kitchen table. "Don't let them tell you what you can't be," she whispered one night, pressing a kiss to his forehead. They'll try harder because of who you are. But you just keep moving." The apartment smelled of bleach and fried food from neighbors cooking down the hall. The walls were thin, the heater unreliable, and rent notices seemed to land at their door every other month. Evelyn stretched every dollar like magic, but Darius could see the toll etched on her face. School wasn't easier. Children teased him for his second-hand sneakers, the ones that squeaked on the linoleum floors of the cafeteria. Teachers, overwhelmed and jaded, rarely looked twice in his direction. He remembered one in particular, Miss Harlan, 6th grade math, leaning down during class to mutter, "Boys like you don't end up in boardrooms. Best you can hope for is keeping out of trouble." The words stuck, not because they were true, but because Darius had seen them become reality for kids around him. Friends with sharp minds but no one to push them. Friends swallowed by the streets before they even had a chance to dream. But Darius had Evelyn, and Evelyn had faith. She scraped enough together to buy him used books, encyclopedias missing pages, a broken-down laptop someone had thrown out. He devoured them all, late into the night, eyes burning under the dim glow of a desk lamp. Knowledge became his armor, facts and figures that couldn't be stripped away by poverty or prejudice. By high school, he was tutoring classmates for extra cash. By college, on a scholarship he fought tooth and nail for, he was the one challenging professors with questions they didn't expect. The same students who once mocked him now came to him for answers. But the humiliation never fully disappeared. He remembered a networking event at 22, fresh out of college, where he pitched his first company idea, affordable solar panels designed for low-income neighborhoods. Investors nodded politely, then asked if he was interning for the real founder. When he explained the company was his, they smiled thinly, their interest vanishing. One of them even said, ambitious. But maybe start smaller. Something more realistic. Darius remembered walking home that night, hands trembling, not from fear but from fury. He thought of his mother scrubbing office floors while billionaires dismissed her son's vision. That was the night he decided. He wouldn't ask permission to exist in their world. He would build his own. And he did. At 22 he launched Cole Dynamics from a cramped apartment. His office nothing more than a desk shoved between his bed and a kitchen counter. By 25 he had signed his first municipal contract, outfitting schools in Georgia with affordable solar power. By 30 he was meeting with international leaders, proving that clean energy wasn't just charity, it was the future. But success didn't erase the memory of every door slammed in his face, every laugh at his expense, every reminder that to them, he wasn't supposed to be in the room at all. And that was why tonight hurt more than it should have. Because standing in that glittering ballroom, surrounded by the elite, he wasn't just Darius Cole, billionaire CEO. He was still the boy in thrift store clothes, still the young man mistaken for the assistant, still the dreamer dismissed before he had even begun. The insult from Charles Langston Sr. cut deeper because it echoed every slight he'd endured on his way up. The difference was that now, it wasn't whispered in a classroom or muttered in a conference hallway. It was broadcast in front of America's most powerful families, and they were laughing. The ballroom tilted back into focus. Glasses clinked, silk gowns shimmered, and the orchestra played on as if nothing had happened. But to Darius, every chuckle was a dagger, every amused smirk another reminder that despite all he had built, they still saw him as less. He forced himself to breathe evenly, recalling Evelyn's voice, "Never let them see you beg." He stood straighter, mask of composure unshaken, though his hands itched to ball into fists at his side. But then something unexpected happened, something that twisted the moment further. One of the Langston grandchildren, a boy no older than 12, tugged on his grandfather's sleeve. "Grandpa," he asked innocently, "is he really a CEO? He doesn't look like the others." The room chuckled again, softer this time, but the sting multiplied. The boy wasn't cruel. He was simply reflecting what he had absorbed from those around him. The prejudice was generational, passed down like an heirloom, polished and normalized. Darius swallowed hard, his throat dry. He knew he could correct the boy, make a joke, shrug it off, but his silence wasn't weakness. It was calculation. Because while the Langstons believed they were in control, Darius carried knowledge that could unravel them all. Still the laughter spread, circling him like wolves closing in. And for the first time that evening, doubt flickered. Not about his worth, he knew his worth, but about whether this room, this deal, this empire built on arrogance, was even worth saving. Back at the gala, as he stood frozen after the insult, the sound of laughter swelled, elite voices mocking, dismissing, reducing him once more to the boy they believed should never have made it out of Atlanta. The laughter lingered, floating through the ballroom like smoke. Darius stood still, spine straight, expression unreadable, but inside his pulse thundered. His silence, meant to shield his dignity, had only emboldened the room. He could feel it, eyes narrowing, smiles twisting, whispers sharpening into open mockery. The Langstons had drawn blood. Now, like wolves who tasted weakness, they circled. Charles Langston Sr. released his grip on Darius's hand but didn't step back. Instead, he clapped him on the shoulder with the faux warmth of a man pretending generosity. "Don't mind us, son," he boomed, his voice carrying across crystal chandeliers and marble floors. "We're just having fun. That's what these galas are for. Relaxation, laughter. You know how it is." Darius gave a measured nod, lips pressed into a polite smile. But the chuckles around him weren't fading. They were multiplying. Victoria Langston, the daughter, swirled her champagne glass lazily, her gaze gliding over him as if he were a specimen under glass. "So, Mr. Cole," she said, voice honeyed with disdain. "Where did you study again? Community college, wasn't it?" A ripple of laughter spread across the circle forming around them. Cameras turned in subtle arcs, journalists hungry for a headline, influencers raising their phones behind discreet gestures. Every second of humiliation was being captured, archived, broadcast. Darius cleared his throat. "I graduated from Georgia Tech," he said evenly. "Top of my class." Victoria tilted her head, feigning surprise. "Ah, yes, Georgia Tech. Not quite Harvard. But I suppose it counts. For some circles." Her brother, Charles Jr., leaned in with a grin sharp as a blade. Impressive, really. A story of grit, pulling yourself up from, where was it again? The projects? It's almost cinematic. He smirked. But let's be honest. Every empire needs its Cinderella moment. You're the lucky one who made it out. That's all this really is, isn't it? Luck. The word stung, not because it was true, but because it stripped away the years of work, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices his mother made, the grind that no one saw. To them it wasn't genius or resilience. It was luck, a fluke that explained how someone like him was standing here at all. The patriarch chuckled. Well, it's nice to have a face like yours around the table. Diversity sells these days. Investors love it. Gives them something to point to when critics come barking. The laughter this time was louder. Darius's chest tightened, but his voice stayed calm. Cole Dynamics was profitable before any partnership. Our investors don't need symbols. They need results. Of course, Charles Sr. said dismissively, patting his arm as though soothing a child. But symbols have power too, don't they? You've become useful. That's nothing to be ashamed of. The words weren't just patronizing. They were calculated, meant to grind his achievements down to dust in front of witnesses. One guest, emboldened, chimed in from the edge of the circle. I read an article that called you the face of progress. You must enjoy that kind of attention. Reminds me of those athletes who get famous talent. Sure, but without the spotlight, just another man in the crowd. The circle erupted with chuckles, nods, murmurs of agreement. Darius felt the ground shifting beneath him. Every headline he had built, every contract signed, every boardroom victory, unraveling in real time. Not because he had failed, but because they had chosen to strip his dignity bare, for sport. And the world was watching. Across the room, journalists exchanged glances, scribbling furiously. Some smiled knowingly, others simply recorded. But none intervened. A scandal was far more valuable than silence. Darius forced himself to breathe. He had trained for this. Every insult he had endured since childhood had been rehearsal for this very stage. But still, the humiliation clung to him, heavy as chains. Victoria leaned in, her voice a velvet dagger. Tell me, Mr. Cole, do your employees ever mistake you for one of them? I mean, you're so approachable. Her eyes gleamed, daring him to react. Darius held her gaze, but his silence only fueled their amusement. He could feel the circle tightening, the walls of privilege pressing in, and then came the twist. Charles Jr., smiling broadly, raised his glass. Ladies and gentlemen, he called out, his voice slicing through the music and chatter. I think it's time we acknowledge what's really happening here tonight. Our dear friend Darius isn't here as a businessman. He's here to entertain us. A story, a face, a novelty, a reminder that the American dream still sells. The ballroom erupted. Laughter, gasps, claps, even cheers. Some shook their heads in disbelief, but many, too many, smiled and nodded, as though Charles Jr. had voiced the unspoken truth. Darius felt the words land like a blade to the chest. Not a partner, not an equal, just a performer for their amusement, a puppet to dress their empire in the colors of diversity. Phones flashed, cameras clicked. The narrative was no longer in his control. He forced himself to stand taller, though his insides churned. His face remained composed, but the fire beneath his calm mask was beginning to burn. And for the first time that night, a dangerous thought whispered in his mind. What if I don't play along? As the laughter swelled and the Langstons grinned, Charles Jr. raised his glass higher and announced to the entire room, let's toast to the entertainment of the evening. Mr. Darius Cole here to remind us all how far a little luck and a good story can go. The toast hung in the air like a blade, glinting, suspended, eager to drop. Crystal chimed, laughter swelled, and Darius did nothing. He didn't raise his glass. He didn't correct the insult. He simply stood there with the stillness of a stone column, at the edge of a hurricane, letting the noise break against him. It wasn't surrender. It was restraint. He set his untouched champagne on the nearest tray, the stem landing with a soft click that only he seemed to hear. A few guests waited for an answer, a flash of temper they could label as proof. When none came, their smirks deepened, the kind of triumph that feeds on the belief that silence is the same as smallness. Charles Jr. leaned closer, voice coated in honey, and something colder. You do silence very well, Mr. Cole. It's almost an art. Darius kept his gaze level, saying nothing. The room read it as confirmation. He was contained, harmless. The entertainment had accepted his role. The wolves relaxed, believing the kill complete. Inside him, rage and heartbreak collided, the force of two storms meeting. He could feel his mother's voice steady as a hand on his shoulder, thread through the chaos. Never let them see you beg. It had been a shield through schoolyard sneers, through interview rooms where his resume was praised and his person doubted, through boardrooms where his projections were dissected as if ambition itself were impertinence. He lifted his chin 1 degree, enough to feel the vertebrae stack into something like armor. A reporter with a press badge angled her phone toward him, pretending to check a text while recording. The flash of the lens caught the tightness at the corners of his mouth, evidence to be parsed later by strangers. Another influencer, rings glittering, whispered to a friend. He froze. It's kind of tragic, as if tragedy were a fashion that might trend before midnight. Victoria's smile softened into something that might have been pity, if it hadn't been so satisfied. The thing is, Darius, she murmured, rooms like this aren't about intelligence, they're about etiquette. Knowing your place. You're bright. No one denies that. But there's a rhythm here. He felt every word press against his ribcage. An old ache returning. The translation of bright into useful, not equal. He let the sentence pass, unchallenged. He counted a breath in, counted a breath out. He measured the music, the slow waltz, the orchestra dipped into, and mapped it against his pulse until the two found a truce. A donor in midnight blue drifted over with a conspiratorial smile. Don't let them get under your skin, she said, never taking her eyes off the Langstons. This family enjoys the spectacle. They always have. It was the closest thing to kindness he'd been offered since stepping through the door. Yet it still lodged like a thorn. Spectacle. The word landed with exquisite accuracy. He thanked her with a nod, not trusting his voice to sound like anything but gravel. Across the ballroom, a dais waited for the evening speeches. Plexiglass podium. Charity logo in Boston gold. 3 microphones looped neatly with black tape. A checklist slid into place in Darius's mind. If he spoke at all tonight, it would be from there, not as a prop beneath a chandelier. He catalogued power like a chessboard. Who held the microphone? Who controlled the screens? Who could kill the sound if they panicked? He had played this game before, only never with the stakes so exquisitely public. Shall we? Charles Sr. said finally, gesturing toward a cluster of investors who had drifted close, eager for the reassurance of old money. We have details to finalize. His tone suggested magnanimity. Come, boy, let us make you, and then let the unspoken hang, presentable. Darius stepped with them, small movements that read to the room as compliance. The circle widened, swallowed him. Hands guided him lightly, politely. A gentleman introduced himself and promptly asked, "Do your engineers file through you? Or is there a chief technology officer who, translates?" Another followed with, "Are you comfortable with legacy integration? Or is Cole Dynamics still in that startup phase?" They smiled when they said startup, as though he had shown up with a lemonade stand. He answered each question, with precision. Clean, spare sentences that contained nothing warm to be twisted into a soundbite. We operate with a systems-first framework. Our grid tech is certified across 5 states. Integration timelines are standardized. He offered no embellishment, no extra note to dissect. The room grew vaguely annoyed. The entertainment wasn't entertaining. In the periphery, the gala director drifted toward the dais and reviewed her clipboard, ticking boxes. Darius tracked her hands. 30 minutes to the key address. The schedule would sanctify whoever stood beneath that crest. The thought lodged in his chest like a fuse. He didn't have to answer the Langstons here. He could answer them there. "Smile," Victoria whispered as a photographer lifted a camera. "Someone's paying for the lights." The flash lanced white. Darius turned slightly, so the lens caught his good side, and not the clenched muscle by his jaw. He had learned the angles of survival. He had learned that telling a particular story with his face could sometimes do more than any sentence. The picture would look composed. It would lie for him, until the truth could speak. A server passed by with a small plate of caviar, and Charles Jr. plucked one without looking. "You know," he said, voice companionable, as if they were boys sharing secrets under bleachers. "It was Father's idea to bring you in. He has an eye for optics, and you do photograph beautifully." Darius met his gaze. "Optics fade, results don't." "Of course," Charles Jr. said, as if humoring a child's recitation. Then, softer, almost intimate. Don't mistake our generosity for need. There it was. The dog whistle pitched just low enough to sound gracious. We don't need you. We are lending you our name. Darius captured the line, tucked it away. Every slight tonight would become fuel. Every insult kindling. He would not burn this room. He would light the sky. He glanced across the crowd and found one of his board members, Annika Rhodes, standing at the edge of the floor. She held herself with the calm of a surgeon. When their eyes met, she gave him a tiny nod. No theatrics, just the recognition between people who had learned to endure and calculate in the same breath. The nod steadied him. It also reminded him that he wasn't the only one in danger if he lost control.
Mr. Cole, an investor drawled. We read your proposal on urban microgrids. Compelling, but it will require political finesse. These cities, he gestured vaguely toward nowhere, aren't always cooperative.
They cooperate when their lights stay on, Darius said. And when their children sleep through the night without sirens failing. A few eyebrows lifted. It was the first sentence he'd allowed to show any temperature. He felt the room tighten, then reset, like a muscle flexing and relaxing. The orchestra swelled. The gala director lifted her hand and rehearsed a cue with the lighting tech. The stage was a clock. He could hear it ticking. A junior Langston cousin sidled up with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. Is it true your company scouts engineers from community colleges? He asked, an edge of amusement in his tone. Yes, Darius said. That's adorable. It's efficient, Darius replied, and left the word brilliant unspoken because he had learned the cost of naming excellence before the right audience. The cousin laughed and wandered away, untroubled by his own mediocrity. Darius watched him go, and felt a strange calm flood his body, as if anger had drained out and cooled into something harder, more useful. The room thought it was winning. That illusion was his cover. A shadow fell across them. The Langston matriarch, Eleanor, approached with a regal gait and eyes like frosted glass. She examined Darius the way one appraises a painting, whose provenance is still under question. I trust, she said lightly, that you understand how cherished this partnership is to our family. I understand how important it will be to the people who live with the infrastructure, Darius said. How noble, she smiled. The word dipped in irony. Charity is tonight's theme, after all. He let it pass. He had already chosen his battlefield. Somewhere behind him, a phone vibrated, insistent enough to buzz against glass. For a beat, he thought it was a phantom, his nerves inventing urgency to puncture the room's cruelty. Then he felt it, a small pulse against his inner jacket pocket. He didn't reach for it. Not yet. He kept his eyes on the stage, measuring the minutes, the steps, the angle he'd need to take to arrive at the podium without being rerouted by a smiling handler. Your table is this way, the gala director called, gesturing past a row of donors. Mr. Langston will make opening remarks, then we'll have the feature address. Mr. Cole, you're second. Second. His breath caught. They had planned to place him after Charles Sr., to follow the patriarch like an opening act, follows a headliner, to soften whatever arrogance the family might wear with a clean, hopeful story about innovation. He pictured the program, elegant typeface, his name beneath Charles's. The optics had been built long before he arrived. He let his silence harden into strategy. Second was perfect. Second was a knife slipped between ivory ribs. If he chose to use it, another vibration, more urgent. He pivoted slightly, letting the conversation around him blur into harmless noise, and reached for his phone. The screen glowed with a single name, Tiana Moss, his chief of staff. She was working the mezzanine tonight. Eyes on logistics, a mind like a locked safe. He lifted the phone so it sat low, shielded by the crook of his elbow. One message, then another. The preview showed only a sliver of words. His pulse kicked hard enough to make the world stutter. Problem? Charles Jr. asked, sipping casually, as if boredom were a delicacy. Darius lowered the phone without looking up. Not at all, he said, voice even. He flicked his gaze toward the dais. The stage lights tested a warm amber wash across the lacquered floor. Somewhere backstage, a microphone hummed awake. The night was lining up like a row of dominoes, each one begging for a fingertip. He turned the screen back to his palm and opened the first text. It was short. It was lethal. Don't sign. We just discovered something about the Langstons. The phone's glow burned against Darius's palm, like a match struck in a cave. He stood near the edge of the floor where shadows pooled between two pillars. the orchestra's strings combing the air with a polite waltz. From the day's spotlights rehearsed a soft amber sweep across glass and gold. Somewhere behind him, a laugh rose, then fell. He opened the message. "Tiana, don't sign. We just discovered something about the Langstons." He didn't react. A camera flash went off to his left, then another. He let the screen drop to his side, his posture unchanged, as if toggling a calendar reminder. The wolves would smell blood in any visible flinch. He lifted the phone again, thumb skimming the next message. "Tiana, secure link in your inbox. Subject Janice. Read the folder named Roots. Then Terms. Then call me." He eased backward into the shadows of a velvet drape and angled the screen. An encrypted email sat in his inbox, humming with urgency. He tapped. The folder bloomed open. Roots. Inside, a PDF stamped with a faded court crest. Benton v.C. Langston Maritime Holdings, 1978. He blinked. Another file scanned clippings from a defunct Atlanta paper. Local engineer claims patent theft. Case sealed. A third, a deposition transcript with the name Dr. Harold Benton typed in a stern, old-fashioned font. He skimmed paragraphs with a discipline honed over years of crisis. Benton, a black electrical engineer, had designed a load-balancing algorithm for microgrids, decades before the term was fashionable. He presented the design to a consortium seeking to electrify portside communities. The consortium's largest funder, Langston Maritime Holdings. Months later, a similar system was deployed under a different name. Benton filed suit. The court sealed it. A settlement routed through Grantham Beacon LLC, a shell company linked through a latticework of subsidiaries back to the Langstons. There were photographs, black and white, creased at the corners, Benton in a narrow tie standing before a whiteboard, dense with equations. A caption from the 1979 article read, "Engineer says invention stolen. I only wanted the lights to stay on." The article ended abruptly. Case dismissed under seal. Darius felt a pressure move behind his sternum, slow and grinding. He pictured Benton's face, the cautious pride of a man who had dared to walk into a room like this, with an idea no one could see until someone else wore it. The past reached forward and touched Darius's wrist like a cold hand. He slid to the next file. OSHA complaints. Port Newark 2015-2023. Injury reports undercounted. Time cards altered. Night shift quotas spiking only in warehouses, staffed mostly by black and immigrant workers. A PDF of internal memos from Victoria Langston's office. Coordinate with PR. Emphasize community investment in any coverage. Do not engage specifics on injury rates. Avoid trigger words, exploitation, fatigue, overtime fraud. He tasted metal. The orchestra lilted on, untroubled. Another file appeared. South River Dynamics 2014. A small startup founded by Simone Hart, a black engineer from Detroit. Darius's thumb stilled. She'd presented a microgrid control schema at a tech expo the year he launched Cole Dynamics' second product line. He remembered her booth inkjet banners, borrowed monitors, brilliance flickering under borrowed light. The file showed cease and desist letters from Langston Global Energy, claiming infringement. A month later, South River's seed funding vanished after a confidential warning circulated to investors. 2 years after that, Langston Global filed a patent with language almost identical to Simone's white paper, minus her name. A note from Tiana was stapled to the PDF. Simone Hart left tech in 2000, unemployed for 18 months after blackballing. Now teaches high school physics. Darius pinched the bridge of his nose, as if he could press the heat back into place. What had felt like an insult earlier, the entertainment line, the pity shaped like respect, was suddenly a visible fruit on a root system that ran cold and deep. He clicked into terms. The draft agreement's clean design was a kind of seduction, ivory space, serif type, the elegance of nearly infinite money. He scrolled to Article 14, Brand Consolidation. His pulse skipped, then struck hard. Upon Phase 2 completion, 18 months, Cole Dynamics shall consolidate its brand and operational footprint under Langston Renewables, South Division. Executive leadership titles shall be re-evaluated to prioritize continuity and market confidence. The role of founder CEO Cole transitions to executive ambassador with advisory functions. Patent portfolios will be cross-licensed exclusively. A supplemental schedule labeled Annex K listed public talking points for the transition. Darius Cole to become the face of shared vision, symbol of access, ambassador for inclusion. Access, symbol, face. They hadn't invited him to build the future with them. They had invited him to stand in front of it while they owned it. His jaw tightened. He scrolled further into Annex L, a clause laying out contingencies if Darius deviated from agreed communications. Penalties were drafted with surgical cruelty, accelerated clawbacks, PR indemnities, personality-based risk offsets. He understood what it meant: strip the company name, park him on a stage, leave him polished, voiceless, and profitable as a silhouette. He tapped the phone icon. Tiana answered on the first ring, her voice hushed, breath quick. "You saw it?" she asked. "I saw it," he said. "There's more," she said. "A whistleblower reached me an hour ago. Compliance analyst at Langston named Jonah Reese. He's here, on staff tonight as..." She hesitated. "As a server. They reassigned him after he raised flags." Darius's gaze slid to the service corridor. The waiter who'd called him late earlier. He replayed the man's face. The quick apology. The twitch in the jaw. Not contempt. Nerves. "What else?" Darius asked. "Jonah gave me access to their archive," Tiana said. "Internal memos, PR scripts, shadow shell companies for settlements. And, Darius, there's a deck for tonight. It outlines how to frame you. Page 3 literally says, leverage the aspirational arc." His throat went tight. He pictured a boardroom where his life, his mother's nights, his long days had been printed as bullet points and passed around like a menu. "Risk?" he asked. Tiana didn't sugarcoat. "If we blow this open, they will come for us. Hard. Lawsuits. Capital flight. They'll lean on our investors. Some will fold. Some of our projects could stall." A beat of silence. Then, "But if we sign, your patents get swallowed, and your name becomes a department, and the people they've been hurting keep paying." Darius said nothing. He looked out over the ballroom. The way light kissed the edge of crystal. The way wealth builds a soundproof room around itself, and calls it merit. He thought of Evelyn leaving at dawn, keys jangling in a hand too raw for the weight of them. He thought of Benton, eyes tired but lit. He thought of Simone of her inkjet banner, and the silence that followed. "Where are you?" he asked. "Mezzanine," Tiana said. "East side." "I'll find Jonah," Darius said. "Stay put." He slipped the phone into his jacket and stepped into the service corridor, the music dropping a dozen decibels as the door swung behind him. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and steam. Staff hurried past in measured bursts, their faces trained into the kind of invisibility a room like the ballroom demands. He spotted the waiter from earlier, mid-30s, tall, a nervous energy barely contained under a pressed jacket. Their eyes met. The man froze. "Jonah?" Darius asked quietly. The man's throat bobbed. "Yes, sir." Darius inclined his head toward a darkened alcove, just far enough from foot traffic to be private without looking clandestine. Jonah followed. Tray held like a shield. "I'm told you reached out to my chief of staff," Darius said. "I did." Jonah's hands trembled. I'm sorry about earlier. They told us a VIP server was late. I thought..." "It's forgotten," Darius said, and meant it. "What do you have?" Jonah set the tray on a side table and slid a folded linen napkin toward Darius. It was heavier than it should have been. Inside, a slim flash drive, lacquer black. "I can't send this over open channels anymore," Jonah said. "They monitor everything. I was supposed to be in compliance. I flagged worker injuries, mostly black men on nights. I flagged the Benton files as a risk. The Simone stuff. They moved me to logistics the next day. Tonight I'm a pair of hands." He swallowed. "They call it adjusting optics. That's what they called you too." Darius closed his fingers around the drive, the weight settling against his palm like a decision. "Why now?" Jonah glanced toward the ballroom door. "Because they can do it until someone says it out loud in a room they don't control." Darius held the man's gaze. "You could lose your job." "I already lost it," Jonah said. "I'm just finishing the shift." A laugh and a burst of applause drifted from the ballroom, muted by the door. The speeches were minutes away. Darius could feel the schedule like a current tugging at his ankles. "Thank you," he said. "If this goes public, I'll make sure you're not stranded." Jonah nodded once, as if bracing himself against wind that hadn't arrived yet. "They put you second," he said. "I saw the run of show. They want you smiling after Mr. Langston." "I know," Darius said. Jonah's mouth pressed into a line. "I hope you don't." He disappeared into the stream of staff. Shoulders hunched, tray balanced like pennants. Darius watched him go, then pressed the flash drive to his phone. The device chirped, recognized it, offered to open. He didn't have time to comb it. He didn't need to. He already knew enough. For a sliver of a second, he let himself feel the fear in its full-size board members urging caution, investors calling at dawn, projects paused, headlines loud and wrong. He imagined the stagger in his team's faces if everything wobbled tomorrow. He imagined telling them he'd gambled their work on a principle the market doesn't price. Then another thought entered, smooth and insistent. If not me, then who? If not tonight, then when? His mother's voice answered, never let them see you beg. He turned the flash drive in his hand and thought of Article 14. He thought of Executive Ambassador, the title shaped like a crown that fits like a collar. He thought of the word symbol, and how it eats the word man, if you let it. The ballroom door opened, and a staffer backed through with a tray, nearly colliding with him. Sorry, she murmured, then glanced up. Oh, Mr. Cole, they're taking seats. Of course, he said, face quiet. He slid the drive into his inner pocket, where it settled against his heart like a small, dangerous truth. He straightened his tie in the reflection of a stainless steel panel, and studied himself as if he were the subject of a portrait he had to get right in one sitting. Eyes steady, shoulders loose, mouth unreadable. He stepped back into the ballroom. The music seemed brighter, the chandeliers crueler. He could feel cameras tilt, feel whispers change shape, as he re-entered the circle. The Langstons looked up from their table, expressions reset to cordial. Charles Sr. gave him the expansive nod of a man born to be agreed with. Victoria's smile flickered, scanning him with the cool curiosity of a predator confirming that the prey had calmed. Darius moved through the aisle, with an easy gait, the kind he wore when walking into his first municipal contract signing. The kind that said, I know what I'm doing when the world said he didn't. He felt the flash drive press against his ribs with every step, a metronome ticking down to the podium. He reached his chair and paused, palms smoothing the linen of the place setting, as if it required attention. He drew a breath that felt like a beginning. Then he lifted his head, and the look in his eyes made the room's temperature change by a single, undeniable degree. He slid his hand into his jacket, felt the evidence like a loaded sentence, and without a word pocketed it, turning toward the dais as the MC announced, Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Charles Langston Sr. The applause for Charles Langston Sr. thundered like forced rain on tin, long and loud enough to signal obedience, but hollow at the core. His speech had been predictable, a paean to family legacy, a sprinkling of charitable platitudes, and a not-so-subtle reminder that wealth was proof of destiny. Darius clapped with the rest, face calm, body still, though the flash drive in his pocket throbbed like a second pulse. He felt the burn of the evidence against his ribs, each breath sinking with the weight of what he carried. Then, with a flourish, the MC smiled toward him. And now, ladies and gentlemen, our honored partner in progress, Mr. Darius Cole. The applause that followed was thinner, polite, a performance of courtesy. Cameras tilted, phones rose, eyes sharpened like scalpels. For the crowd, this was intermission, a palate cleanser after Charles's declaration of dynasty. Darius stood. His chair slid back with a whisper against marble. He adjusted his cuffs with deliberate slowness, walked the length of the aisle, and mounted the steps of the dais. The light struck his face, warm and unrelenting. The podium gleamed under his hands. His prepared speech, a clean set of notes printed in serif font, waited in his breast pocket. But as he gazed out at the ballroom, a sea of expectation dressed in gowns and tuxedos, he knew he would not be using it. He glanced at Charles Sr., who leaned back in his chair with a faint smirk. Victoria sipped her champagne, as if this were already over. Charles Jr. folded his arms, ready to enjoy another performance from their symbol. Darius let the silence stretch, just long enough for the weight of it to make the orchestra shift uncomfortably in their chairs. Good evening, he began. His voice was measured, low, but it carried. I was asked to speak tonight about innovation, about the deal before us, and about what it means for the future. A few nods. Cameras steadied. Nothing new yet. But I'm not going to give you the speech I prepared, he continued. A ripple moved across the room. Unease. The Langston smiles stiffened. Because what I prepared was polished, Darius said. It was written to fit neatly between a toast and a round of applause. It was designed to make you feel comfortable. And I think we've all had enough comfort tonight. A few eyebrows rose. He gripped the edges of the podium. Instead, I want to tell you a story. My story. Not the version that fits into glossy magazines or investor prospectuses. The real one. His gaze swept the crowd. Some leaned forward, curious. Others sat back, arms crossed, already irritated. I grew up in Atlanta, he said, in an apartment where rent notices arrived more often than birthday cards. My mother worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, just to keep food on the table. I studied by candlelight when the power was cut. I wore thrift store shoes that squeaked loud enough for classmates to hear before I walked into a room. The room stirred. This was not the script they expected. And I remember teachers who told me not to aim too high. I remember being told, boys like you don't end up in boardrooms. His voice hardened slightly. Well, they were right. Boys like me don't end up in boardrooms. Unless they break the locks off the doors and build their own tables. A murmur rippled through the ballroom. The phrase had an edge, something defiant. Victoria laughed lightly, breaking the tension. How inspirational, she said, raising her glass as though humoring a student presentation. But Darius didn't flinch. He continued. I built my first company, in a 1-bedroom apartment. I pitched ideas to investors who looked me in the eye and asked if I was the intern. I was mistaken for staff at meetings I'd organized. And yet, I built brick by brick, contract by contract, not with luck, not with favors, but with the kind of work no one here in this room has ever had to understand. The orchestra had stopped fidgeting. The audience was caught between discomfort and unwilling fascination. I've heard a lot tonight about luck, he said, letting the word hang. About optics. About being useful. His eyes landed squarely on Charles Jr. But luck didn't keep my company alive when doors slammed in my face. Optics didn't design the systems now powering schools and hospitals across this country. And usefulness. He paused. Usefulness is not the same as value. I am not here because I'm useful to anyone. I am here because I earned it. A hush fell. Someone in the back clapped once, then stopped, silenced by the weight of the room. Charles Sr. leaned toward Victoria, muttering something sharp. She pressed her lips into a thin smile, but Darius caught the flicker of irritation in her eyes. He pressed on. You laugh at me, you question whether I belong, but I've been questioned my entire life. I've been underestimated, dismissed, insulted, and I stand here still, and I will keep standing. His voice grew stronger, more resonant, because I don't measure myself against what rooms like this think of me. I measure myself against the world I came from, and the one I'm building for those who come after. The silence was different, now. No longer polite, dismissal, but something heavier. Some in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Others, investors, journalists, leaned closer, sensing the tone of the night turning. Darius let his gaze sweep the rows of billionaires, donors, power brokers. You think I should be grateful to stand among you. But here's the truth. I don't need your validation. I don't need your permission. And I certainly don't need to smile while you diminish me. Gasps broke out. Someone coughed sharply. The MC shifted nervously off stage. Because I know something you don't want me to say, Darius continued, his voice steady as steel. I know the truth about your empire. The words cracked across the ballroom like lightning. A collective gasp swept through the audience. Guests leaned forward, whispers rising like wind through dry leaves. Phones shot up higher. Cameras zoomed. Charles Sr.'s smirk vanished. His knuckles tightened against the tablecloth. And Darius, standing tall under the hot lights, let the silence hold just a second longer before he pressed forward. And tonight, he said, eyes locked on the Langstons, I intend to share it. For a beat after the promise, I intend to share it. The ballroom seemed to tip on its axis. Dresses stilled. Champagne paused midair. The chandeliers held their light like a breath. Darius leaned into the microphones. You want a story you can market. A tidy arc. But the truth doesn't fit on a brochure. His voice carried cleanly, each word a measured step across ice. The truth is older than all of us. It starts long before this room, and it runs straight through it. He didn't look at the Langstons first. He looked past them, to the rows of donors and politicians and executives whose eyes reflected both curiosity and fear. Tonight you toasted legacy, he said, as if legacy were only a ribbon you hang on a portrait. But legacy is also a ledger, and there are names missing from yours. Victoria set down her glass. Mr. Cole, she called out, tone silken. This is a charity gala. It is, Darius replied. For children. So let's talk about what those children inherit. A current moved through the room, uneasy, electric. Somewhere off to his left, a journalist angled her phone higher to his right. A hedge funder's smile shrank to a line. "When I was a boy," he said, "my mother walked to work before sunrise. She joined a line of people who kept buildings clean that they could never afford to enter by the front door. I learned early what rooms like this took for granted. And when I built a company, I walked into meetings where my ideas were praised and my presence was questioned. I was told I was inspiring. I was told I was useful. I was told I had a good story." He let the word hang. "But my story is a doorway," he continued, voice low, steady. "It opens to a corridor full of other stories you never learned." He drew a breath and felt the flash drive press against his ribs. A reminder. In 1978, he said, a black engineer named Dr. Harold Benton proposed a load balancing system for microgrids. Technology that could have stabilized neighborhoods near ports where the power flickers like a bad memory. He presented it to a consortium that included a major maritime funder. Months later, his idea appeared under another name. He sued. The case was sealed. He disappeared from your headlines. A murmur rolled across the tables. Skeptical, disbelieving, defensive. Charles Sr. leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Careful," he warned softly, his voice just loud enough to carry to the dais. "These aren't rumors," Darius said. "They're records." As if on cue, the LED wall behind him blinked. The gala logo dissolved into a grayscale photograph. A man in a narrow tie standing before a whiteboard, crowded with equations. "Dr. Harold Benton," the caption read. Then a clipped headline from a decades-old newspaper. "Engineer claims invention stolen. Case sealed." A ripple of surprise cut through the room. The MC shot a glance toward the tech booth. Up on the mezzanine, Tiana stood at the railing, face unreadable, phone in her hand. Victoria's chair scraped softly. "This is wildly inappropriate," she said, eyes darting to the screen, then to the audience. "Inappropriate is a word that protects the powerful from discomfort," Darius replied. "History is not inappropriate. It is simply inconvenient." He didn't give the room time to recover. In 2014, an engineer named Simone Hart built a control schema for distributed grids. She raised a small seed round. She was told she was promising, then she was told to stop. After an infringement letter and a whisper campaign, her funding vanished. 2 years later, language almost identical to her white paper was filed under a different company. She left tech. She teaches high school now. He found the faces that softened at the mention of a teacher. She should be running a lab. The screen shifted again. A photo clipped from a conference program. South River Dynamics. Founder Simone Hart. Then a patent excerpt whose phrasing was familiar enough to prickle even untrained ears. Someone at a center table exhaled. Sharp. A woman in a black dress whispered, "I remember her," to the man beside her. He shook his head slowly, as if trying to dislodge the recognition. "This is slander," Charles Jr. said. Laughter thinned into something brittle. "This is a performance. This," Darius answered, "is a restoration." He widened the lens. For generations, black labor built the industries that funded rooms like this. Railroads, ports, factories, work that wore bodies down while the profits climbed. When brains joined the labor, when the ideas came, when designs came, the theft became quieter. Names fell off the page. Patents appeared under someone else's signature. And when anyone protested, settlements disappeared those protests into shells and seals. He watched the words land. Some in the audience looked away, their eyes seeking anything easier than the mirror. Others held his gaze, as if grateful for the articulation of something they had felt, but never heard said. "This plainly in this kind of room. Legacy is not neutral," he said. "It's engineered. It's curated. It can be used to cover harm with charity, and call it generosity. Meanwhile, the people who were used as the scaffolding are asked to smile for the ribbon cutting." The matriarch Eleanor lifted her chin. "We have given millions to communities," she said, voice frosted, every syllable a reprimand. "We have built clinics, schools, warehouses," Darius said quietly, "where night shift quotas rise only for the darkest hands." The LED wall changed again. Charts, OSHA complaints, redacted memos, words like fatigue and overtime whispering through the text like a bruise. A low wave of voices swelled, then broke. A man 2 rows back stood halfway, eyes glassy with memory. "I knew Benton," he said, surprising even himself. The room pivoted toward him. He did come to the port. He had something and then he faltered, looked at Eleanor, sat down without finishing, as if yanked by an unseen rope. That, more than any slide, cracked the room. The truth had climbed out of the past and taken a seat at table 7. Charles Sr. rose slowly. The movement deliberate, stately. Terrible. Turn it off, he told the techs, voice mild but carrying the weight of instruction. He didn't look at Darius when he added, "We are not obligated to indulge this theatrics."
The microphones crackled. Someone backstage hesitated. The LED wall stuttered, blinked, then held. Darius didn't look back at it. He kept his eyes on the audience.
"You have told me tonight to be grateful," he said, "to know the rhythm of this room. But I didn't come here to find my place inside your script. I came here because I believed we could build something that outlives all of this posturing. And I still believe it can be built, just not on a foundation poured from someone else's stolen blueprints." He felt the silence deepen into a gravity that bent faces toward him. He could sense the journalists deciding which verbs to trust. He could feel the donors calculating the optics of their seats. "My mother once told me," he said, "never let them see you beg. She also told me something else. When someone tells you who they are, don't correct them. Tonight, you told me who you are. You told me when you laughed. You told me when you called me a symbol. You told me when you said this is not the place. If there's no place in this room for the truth, then the room is the problem." He didn't raise his voice, but something in it sharpened, an edge of resolve that startled even him with its clarity. Across the mezzanine, Tiana lowered her phone slightly, as if to steady her hands. "Mr. Cole," the MC said, stepping one foot into the light. "Perhaps we can return to the scheduled." "We are on schedule," Darius said. "We're right on time." For the first time since he began, a cluster of guests applauded. Small, startled, genuine. It wasn't enough to sway the room, but it was enough to make it falter. Eleanor leaned toward her son. "End it," she said. Charles Sr. gave the smallest nod. The staff at the walls exchanged glances. Two men with discreet earpieces detached from their posts and began moving down the aisle with the practiced neutrality of people trained to be invisible until the moment they're not. Darius saw them. He didn't step back. "Before you cut the lights," he said, "there's one more name." He let the microphones catch the catch in his breath and didn't hide it. "A boy who tugged his grandfather's sleeve tonight and asked if I was really a CEO because I didn't look like the others. That boy didn't invent his question. He learned it. He inherited it. That's legacy too, and it's not his fault. It is yours." The sentence hit like a cold wind. Victoria flinched, then caught herself. He straightened. "You asked for a story. Here it is. The people you erase do not disappear. They wait. They keep the receipts. And when the room finally quiets, they speak." A hush fell so complete you could hear the faint hum of the LED wall. Then the spell broke. The earpiece men quickened. A third joined. The MC touched his own earpiece and nodded, the way a pilot nods before taxi. Darius's hands rested lightly on the plexiglass. He didn't look at the approaching suits. He looked at the crowd he had come to fear less than his own silence. "Now you have a choice," he said softly. "Listen, or prove my point." From the aisles, black suits fanned outward, closing the distance to the stairs, their faces carefully blank. Security began to climb the steps toward the podium, and the house lights drifted a fraction brighter, as if the room itself were preparing to smother his mic. The first security guard reached the bottom step, shoulders squared, face carefully blank, polite force wrapped in tuxedo black. Two more fanned out behind him, telegraphing calm the way a storm telegraphs blue sky right before it breaks. The house lights eased brighter by a degree that wasn't obvious until it was. The room tried to wash him out. Darius didn't step back. He placed both hands on the plexiglass podium and let the room see that he was still. The stillness wasn't compliance. It was an anchor. Phones rose like a field of small moons. He caught glints of screens in every direction. Guests, journalists, staffers pretending to text while holding their cameras at shoulder height. Somewhere on the mezzanine, a red tally light burned on a broadcast camera the gala had hired for the charity stream. Beside it, Tiana stood at the rail, her eyes locked on him. She sent a text. His phone buzzed against his wrist. "Tiana, you're live. Every platform. Trending tags, not your symbol. Truth at the gala." The guard took the first step onto the dais. The MC, smile fixed at a painful angle, lifted a hand as if he could soothe the moment into a softer shape. "Mr. Cole," he said, Voice amplified. Perhaps we can continue, Darius said into the mic, not looking away from the crowd. The word landed gently, and somehow made the room smaller for everyone but him. A senator 2 tables in front lowered his drink slowly, as if remembering that constituents had eyes. A celebrity couple stopped whispering and lifted their phones higher. Language rolled through the audience in sharp, soft bursts. Lawsuit, PR, donor list, who is he to, while the LED wall behind Darius held steady on a black and white photograph of Dr. Benton. History didn't blink. Mr. Cole, Charles Langston Sr. called up, voice paternal and edged. You've made your point. Let's respect the evening. Darius didn't take the bait. Respect, he said, isn't a program note. He let the microphones carry the softness. It's a practice. You earn it. You don't schedule it. A pocket of applause cracked from the back, surprised and small, like a sound that escaped before its owner could decide whether to make it. The guards hesitated mid-step, waiting for a cue that didn't arrive. The orchestra began to rise in their chairs, as if to play the tension away. The conductor met Darius's eyes. He sat back down. On the mezzanine, Tiana's second text flashed. Tiana network producers picked up the charity feed. We're on cable. Donor hotline is ringing off the hook. Board group chat is quiet but reading. A ripple ran through Darius. Not relief, not fear, but the sure knowledge that narrative had slipped its leash. The Langstons had always counted on the room to be the room. Beautiful, controlled, curated. But rooms are fictions, and fictions collapse under light. Victoria stood, crisp smile gone. End the feed, she told the tech booth. Voice pitched to travel without appearing to shout. We are not paying for our own defamation. No one moved. When power wavers, even its servants pause. Darius leaned a fraction closer to the mic. I said there was a ledger, he said, letting his voice drop into the kind of quiet that makes people lean in. You've seen a page. There are hundreds more workers, whose hours were erased. Startups starved of oxygen the moment their ideas were useful. Lawsuits swept under rugs that looked like philanthropy. He felt the first guard's presence at his left shoulder, the slight heat of a body trying to be invisible. The man spoke low so the mic wouldn't catch it. Sir, we're going to ask you to step away from the podium. Darius didn't turn, and I'm going to ask you to consider who's watching you. Ask me that, he said, just as softly. Your mother, your kids, the people who trained you to do the right thing when it's inconvenient. The man's throat moved. His eyes flicked the sea of phones, then to the LED wall, then back to Darius. He didn't step closer. Unexpectedly, a donor at table 3, silver hair, name stitched to libraries, stood with the deliberate care of someone picking a fight with gravity, not people. Let the man finish, he said, voice thin but steady. If you cut him, you make his point for him. It was small. It was enormous. Half the room turned to check who had granted permission to listen. Some rolled their eyes at the old man's naivete. Others exhaled, grateful for cover. Charles Jr. laughed once too loud. This is a circus, he said to the room, to the cameras, to anybody who would help him believe it. You're being manipulated by a very talented engineer, Darius said, finally looking straight at him. You keep forgetting that part. I build systems, including the kind that don't need your permission to operate. A whisper bloomed across the tables. He planned this. He hadn't, not like a heist, not with marks and timing. But he had spent his whole life preparing to be interrupted, discounted, replaced. Preparation makes accidents look like design. His phone buzzed again. Tiana, sponsor of the broadcast, just called the control room. If they cut you, they cut their check. The director says no blackouts. Darius felt the map redraw under his feet. The Langstons had underestimated the part of power that isn't money, momentum, attention, the moral instinct that wakes up late, but hungry. He took a breath that tasted like brand new air. Rooms like this talk about markets as if markets were weather, he said. But markets are stories. You tell them, you sell them, you punish anyone who tells a different one. Here's mine. I'm not your symbol. I'm not your shield. I'm not your photo on a brochure to cover the bruises underneath. I am a builder, and I refuse to build on rock. A murmur that sounded like agreement skated the edges of the room. Not the whole room. Enough of it to matter. Eleanor Langston rose, frost never leaving her face. You have benefited from our invitation, she said, voice precise. From our credibility, our network, our good name. Your name might be old, Darius said, but that doesn't make it good. The first real gasp of the night lifted and fell like a wave. Somewhere, A glass tipped and chimed against the floor. BMC took another half step into the light, stopped, retreated. Down front, the 12-year-old grandson who'd asked his question earlier watched with wide, confused eyes. Darius registered him and kept his voice steady for the boy's sake as much as anyone's. "You asked if I was really a CEO because I don't look like the others," he said, addressing the heir rather than the child directly. "I don't. That's the point. The future doesn't look like the past. It shouldn't." A journalist mouthed quote to her cameraman. Another text from Tiana. "Tiana, investors pinging IR. 2 hedges want to talk options. Also, Jonah says internal Langston Slack is melting down." Someone typed "cut his mic," and another replied "donor feed will sue." The guard at Darius's shoulder shifted, then stepped back 1 pace, choosing neutrality. The other 2 stalled at the foot of the stairs, eyes on their supervisors, who suddenly found their own eyes on the sponsors. It was a dangerous game now, and Darius knew it. Stand too long, and be framed as ungrateful, too angry, the stereotype they had rehearsed for him. Step down too soon and the truth would become rumor again. Sealed under the next glossy brochure, he walked the line like a man raised on balance beams, built over nothing. "I came here believing we could build something together," he said softer. "I came here thinking that maybe, finally, rooms like this were ready to share power rather than borrow faces. But deals are only as clean as the hands that sign them." A woman at the far table, city council, mid-tier, mid-power, called. "What are you asking for?" The honesty of it disarmed the room. Darius didn't make her wait. "Accountability," he said. "For names erased and labor exploited. For settlements that gagged the truth. For workers injured on night shifts, while press releases called it community investment. I'm asking you to stop applauding yourselves for charity while you outsource the cost of your profits to people who can't buy a seat in this room." Victoria's face hardened into something like threat. "You have no idea what you're walking into," she said. Voice low, eyes like polished stone. "We will defend our reputation." "You've done it for decades," Darius said. "With money, with access, with a smile. I'm not afraid of any of that. I am afraid of one thing, becoming what you planned for me to become." "And what's that?" she asked. He let the word find its shape in the quiet. "Decorative." A sound left the crowd that wasn't laughter and wasn't pity. It was recognition, which is more dangerous than either. His phone buzzed, one more time, like a drum beat. "Tiana, last thing. Our council says if you walk now they can spin it. If you define it, they have to answer to it. Decide at the mic, not later. Decide at the mic." He looked out and saw faces that would write tomorrow's story, whether they meant to or not. He saw the donors computing risk, the politicians measuring wind, the influencers feeling their follows surge. He saw Jonah at the wall, holding a tray like a shield, eyes bright with a kind of terror that comes right before relief. Then Darius saw something else. His mother's hands knotted with work, a borrowed laptop on a Formica table, a boy studying by candlelight not as a symbol but because he wanted the power back on. He straightened. The decision had been traveling toward him his entire life. It arrived without fanfare. "I was supposed to smile tonight," he said. "I was supposed to sell you a future built on a past you put in a vault. I'm choosing something else." Eleanor's chin lifted. "Choose carefully." "I am," he said. He turned his head to include the cameras, the mezzanine, the quiet countries that live in comment sections, the rooms where this night would be replayed to explain to children how adults behave when the truth walks in wearing a tuxedo. "For the record, so no one has to misquote me later, I'll say it plain." He let the air thin around the words, until everyone's breath was on his. "I will not be a symbol while you keep the power." The LED wall dimmed a fraction, as if the electricity itself leaned closer. "And effective immediately," Darius said, voice unshaking. "I am canceling the $900 million deal." For a heartbeat, the room went silent. The chandeliers hummed faintly above. The orchestra's bows froze midair, and the microphones picked up only the sound of Darius's breath. Then the words detonated. "I am canceling the $900 million deal." The sentence ricocheted across the ballroom, like glass shattering in a cathedral. Gasps spiked from every corner. A champagne flute slipped from someone's hand and exploded on marble. A sharp punctuation mark. Investors jolted in their chairs. Journalists lunged forward with cameras raised, and donors muttered calculations out loud, like gamblers realizing the deck had changed. The Langstons sat frozen, each wearing a different mask of disbelief. Charles Sr.'s face drained pale. His his jaw working furiously as though his mouth were searching for a script and finding none. Victoria's poise cracked. Her hand trembled as she set down her glass before it slipped. Charles Jr. barked out a laugh that sounded like panic disguised as humor. The MC stammered into his microphone, voice trembling. "Ladies and gentlemen, perhaps we should." But he was drowned out by the chaos. Reporters surged toward the dais, phones live streaming, questions shouted over one another. "Mr. Cole, is this final? What evidence do you have? Are you accusing the Langston family directly?" Guests craned their necks, some whispering furiously into phones, others standing to get a better view of the spectacle, unraveling in real time. Hashtags lit up screens across the mezzanine. "Cancel the deal, not your symbol. Langston exposed." Within minutes, the story had leapt from the gilded ballroom into the bloodstream of the world. Darius didn't move. He let the frenzy unfold, his silence now a weapon sharper than any word. For the first time that night, he wasn't the one on trial. The Langstons were. Charles Sr. finally stood, his frame shaking, one hand gripping the back of his chair for balance. His voice, once the commanding boom of old money, now cracked under the weight of fury. "You arrogant child," he hissed, though the microphones carried it to every corner. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Darius turned his head slowly toward him. "I know exactly what I've done," he said, voice calm, almost serene. "I've chosen dignity over decoration." The words sliced clean through the noise. A cheer rose from the back tables, scattered but real. The fissure in the room widened. Some guests clapped cautiously, others scowled, others froze between allegiances. Victoria snapped, her composure collapsing into open contempt. "This is slander," she spat. "You think you can walk into our house, use our stage, and spit on our name? We built this empire before you were born. We will bury you." Her voice carried, shrill against the velvet acoustics. Phones caught every syllable. Darius didn't flinch. He met her eyes. Empires built on silence don't survive the sound of truth. The orchestra musicians, still stranded mid-set, exchanged glances. One of them, a violinist with gray at his temples, quietly lowered his bow and began to clap. The sound was hesitant, fragile, but it spread two, then three, then a corner of the room erupting in applause. Charles Jr. slammed his palm against the table. "You fools," he barked at the clapping guests. "Do you realize what this means? Do you realize what he's throwing away?" But they weren't listening. Their eyes weren't on him. They were on Darius. For a moment, Darius felt something loosen in his chest. The humiliation that had opened the night had been transmuted, reshaped into something unbreakable. What had begun as a wound had become a stage. He thought of Evelyn's words, "Never let them see you beg," and realized he hadn't just obeyed her. He had turned her survival into resistance. But the Langstons weren't finished. Charles Sr. slammed his cane against the floor. The sound cracked like a gunshot. The applause died instantly. All eyes swung back to him. "You think this is your victory?" he said, his voice ragged but venomous. "You think you've embarrassed us?" He leaned on the cane, his breath shallow, fury vibrating in every syllable. "We will destroy you. Do you understand me? If you don't walk back those words right now, if you don't sign this deal as agreed, we will end you, your company, your reputation, your so-called empire. It will vanish, and the world will thank us for it." The threat rang out across the room, raw and naked. Gasps echoed. Even allies shifted uncomfortably at the bluntness of it. For decades, the Langstons had hidden their cruelty behind polish, behind charm, behind wealth. But now, cornered, they showed their teeth. Darius gripped the podium tighter. His pulse hammered, not with fear but with clarity. They had just confirmed what he had been saying all along. That their empire was built, not on respect but on domination, intimidation, and erasure. Still, the weight of the threat pressed down on him. He could feel the risk lawsuits. Investors pulled, projects stalled. The future he'd built balanced on a knife's edge. But then he remembered Jonah's trembling hands as he passed him the flash drive. He remembered Simone Hart's name, erased from the history she had written. He remembered Dr. Benton's photograph, yellowed and almost lost. And he realized this wasn't just about him. He leaned into the microphone, his voice a steady flame. "You just threatened me in front of the world," he said. "Do you think that makes me weaker? It makes me undeniable. Because everyone watching knows now, when you are challenged, you don't argue, you destroy. That's not power, that's fear." Gasps erupted. Some guests clapped again, louder now, their courage swelling with his defiance. Journalists shouted questions, their voices tinged with awe. Hashtags exploded anew. Charles Jr. pointed at him, face twisted with rage. You'll regret this. Every boardroom you walk into from now on will remember tonight. Every contract, every investor, we will poison them against you. Darius tilted his head, his voice unshaken. Then maybe it's time to build a world where your permission isn't the price of progress. The words hit harder than a shout. They landed like prophecy. Victoria slammed her chair back and strode toward the dais, her heels striking the marble like war drums. You will apologize, she demanded, her fingers stabbing the air. You will retract, or I will see you begging in the dust by morning. She climbed the first step before security, uncertain who they were supposed to protect, reached out to stop her. Cameras snapped furiously. Darius didn't move. He stood as though carved from stone, the crowd roaring around him, the empire before him cracking. He had turned their stage into his pulpit, their gala into his reckoning. But as Victoria's voice cut through the chaos, as Charles Sr. trembled with fury and Charles Jr. spat threats into the air, Darius understood. This was no longer a battle for respect. This was war for survival. The Langstons' voices rose above the din, their threat ringing sharp and final. If you don't take it back, we will destroy you. The threat hung in the air like heat. We will destroy you. And for a moment the ballroom felt smaller than the breath it took to say it. A camera on a jib swung gently above the crowd, catching the white knuckles on crystal stems, the tight smiles petrifying on donor faces. The way power looks when it realizes it might bleed. Darius didn't flinch. He wrapped both hands around the podium and let the microphones catch only the steadiness of his breathing. The world is watching, he said, not loud, not theatrical, just fine. The guard at his shoulder stepped back. The other two froze at the stairs, suspended between training and the glow of 100 phones. The MC's smile tried to reattach itself to his face, and failed. Charles Langston Sr. straightened, rage sharpening into strategy. You will be sued, he said, voice low enough to sound reasonable and amplified enough to travel. Breach, defamation, tortious interference. We will petition the SEC to examine your disclosures. We will inform every lender you've ever courted that you are unstable. We will make sure rooms like this stop opening. Darius's mouth curved. Barely. Rooms like this were never open. I've been picking the lock my whole life. A murmur rolled the length of the hall. Investors traded glances, the look of people recalibrating in real time. A donor in pearls whispered into her phone, "Just watch. Don't pull yet." A city councilman swallowed his grin and checked that a camera could see him not grinning. Victoria's voice cut in, brittle with triumph that hadn't arrived. Your board will panic by morning. Your stock will slide. You'll be lucky if your name survives the week without an asterisk. Maybe, Darius said. Or maybe fear is just the sound an old story makes when it's ending. You are not the judge of our story, Eleanor replied, chin lifted, vowels crisp. Young man. He didn't let the phrase finish. I'm not young to this, he said. It was gentle and it landed like a gavel. His phone buzzed once against his ribs. Tiana. Trending 10-1 in US and 10-3 globally. Sponsor won't allow a blackout. 2 networks cut into live coverage. Brace for questions. Across the floor, Annika Rhodes, still composed, watched him with a level gaze. At table 7, the violinist who had clapped earlier pressed his hands flat on his sheet music, as if steadying a page that wanted to fly. Charles Jr. switched tactics, smile turning lawyerly. There's a reason we have contracts, he said. You signed term sheets. You accepted conditions. You courted our credibility. You cannot pivot to martyr, because the spotlight tempts you. Darius tilted his head. You keep mistaking me for your product. And you keep mistaking yourself for more than a story. Charles Jr. shot back. Stories move markets, Darius said. Yours is failing. His thumb brushed the podium. The LED wall behind him shifted, quietly, cleanly, from the charity logo to a single slide, Annex K, Ambassador Transition. Bullet points glowed in tasteful serif. Phase 2, rebrand Coal Dynamics under Langston Renewables. Title shift, Founder Executive Ambassador. Talking points, leverage aspirational arc, celebrate symbol of access. 1,000 throats made a noise too small to be called a gasp, and too large to be ignored. The MC turned, startled. Victoria's hand flew up before she could stop it. That is proprietary, she snapped. Illegal to show, and out of context. Show the context, someone called from the mezzanine. Darius didn't turn. There are more slides, he said to the room. Memos, injury reports, settlement shells. Journalist will do what I refuse to do. Yell without proof. I respect this moment too much for that. So receipts. He let the word rest on the lacquered air. We can litigate, or we can account. Eleanor's lips thinned. Do you imagine that because you found a deck you understand a dynasty? I understand what you do when no one says no. A young executive at a back table stood as if surprised by his own legs. Let him finish, he said. Then sat, cheeks flushed, courage documented forever. Charles Sr. leaned on his cane and found the camera lens with instinctive accuracy. Ladies and gentlemen watching at home, he intoned, we regret that a private negotiation has been turned into a spectacle by a man who is frankly unwell with ambition. He pivoted. Expert. Poisonous. We admired Mr. Cole. We wanted to help him. He has chosen to burn bridges instead. For the good of the charity, The charity, Darius said, deserves transparency too. The LED wall ticked to a new image. A flowchart of the Langston Foundation's giving, lines curling into a company, Grantham Beacon LLC. The same shell that had appeared in Benton's settlement file. A hush fell like snowfall. Oh, that's rich, Victoria said, laugh brittle. You're going to call philanthropy laundering now? I'm going to call patterns what they are, Darius said. Money out the front door to applause. Money in the back door to bury the reason you produced it. Phones lit with notifications like lightning in a distant storm. Darius is buzzed again. Tiana. Big outlet just published excerpts from Janice. They're naming Benton and South River. You've got corroboration. The MC's voice fluttered. We must return to the program. This is the program, Darius said, and the calm in his tone stole the breath from 2 rows of donors who hadn't realized they were holding it. Charles Jr. leaned forward. New angle smear. Tell them about your community access fund, he said, savoring each word. The one that moved money through a Nevada 501(c)(3). Tell them about the consultant you hired who was later indicted. You want to talk receipts? A ripple of aha rolled the room. Darius blinked once. The consultant was indicted for fraud unrelated to our work, he said evenly. We cooperated with investigators and recovered every dollar. The fund's books are public. Yours are press releases. Oh, please, Charles Jr. scoffed. We both, Charles, Eleanor snapped, the single word a leash. The orchestra, marooned, peeked over their stands like a chorus that had forgotten its line. Security stayed still, sensing that one wrong step would be a meme before dawn.
Darius breathed.
He could feel fatigue skimming the edges of his focus, that familiar heat in the chest that comes when you tell a hard thing and refuse to regret it. He set it down like a weight and chose the lighter truth. I won't fight you on your terms, he said. Threat for threat, press for press. You've practiced that too long to lose tonight. But this, he gestured softly at the lights, the cameras, the faces. This isn't about who wins a headline. It's about who gets to decide what dignity costs. A beat, then another. The room shifted, minutely, undeniably toward him. You can sue me, he said. You can call every banker, every donor, every editor whose number you've had since your christening. You can whisper that I'm difficult, that I'm angry, that I'm ungrateful. People will believe you. Some always do. But there are 10,000 kids watching this, who will learn what happens when a black man refuses to be the decoration on someone else's story. I'm speaking to them. Eleanor's eyes flashed, and for an instant the polish cracked enough to show steel. You presume a moral monopoly, she said. We built jobs, we built schools, and you built a culture that calls people like me lucky to be invited and dangerous if we speak, Darius answered. I'm done managing your comfort. A faint cheer rose, then a second. It wasn't a wave, it was a weather change. His phone buzzed again, different pattern. Tiana, heads up, producer in the pit says a reporter got something big in her inbox. She's about to ask on air. Darius glanced briefly toward the press pen. The reporter who'd tilted her phone earlier, dark suit, clear eyes, had a hand up. The MC pretended not to see. Take the question, Darius said, and stepped slightly aside so the camera could see her and the LED wall at once. No, Victoria said sharply. We're not opening. You already opened it, Darius said. The reporter didn't wait for permission. She rose. Mic lifted. Voice steady in the strange quiet that follows a decision. Victoria Langston, she said. Gaze fixed. This is live. We just received a packet from an internal whistleblower. It includes an email from your office sent 6 weeks ago, subject line, Ambassador Plan, directing staff to smile him through Phase 1 and sunset him by Q3. It also includes a scanned settlement from 1979, moving money through Grantham Beacon to silence Dr. Harold Benton. 2 questions. The room held its breath like a single animal. First, the reporter said, "Did you authorize the sunset plan for Mr. Cole after the close?" She didn't blink. And second, did your family's foundation use a charity shell to route hush money in the Benton case while claiming a tax deduction for the gift? The reporter's question cracked the ballroom open like thunder. Her voice carried not only across the chandeliers, but also through millions of screens streaming live. The words hung heavy, undeniable. Sunset him by Q3. Hush money in the Benton case. For a moment silence pressed against the walls. It was the silence of calculation. Every guest, every donor, every politician measuring which side of history would cost them more. Victoria's mouth opened, then closed. Charles Jr. muttered something under his breath, but the microphones so carefully arranged betrayed him. They weren't supposed to know. The phrase slipped into the air like oil on water. Gasps erupted. The room shifted. The wolves had cut themselves. Darius didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply stood at the podium, the calm center of a storm he no longer had to summon. His silence was not retreat. It was invitation. An invitation for others to step into courage. And they did. A woman at table 4, actress, philanthropist, face of several charities, stood slowly. Her sequined gown glittered in the spotlight as she raised her voice. "I donated to the Langston Foundation for years," she said, the tremor in her tone betraying both anger and fear. "I thought I was building schools. If what I just heard is true, then we've all been building a wall to hide stolen names." Murmurs surged. Heads turned toward her, then toward Darius, then back at the Langstons. A congressman leaned into his microphone, the kind meant for polite acknowledgments of donations. "I served on a committee where Langston subsidiaries came under review for labor violations," he said. The report vanished. "I thought it was politics as usual." Now, he trailed off, but the implication filled the silence. It was a domino effect. One admission emboldened another. A rival CEO, normally quiet in public, stood. "We lost a municipal contract to Langston Global in 2017, he said. "We suspected bid rigging, but the auditors disappeared." Hearing this now, his hands tightened on the back of his chair. "Maybe we were right to suspect." The applause started again, hesitant, then swelling. It wasn't the charity clapping of earlier. It was raw, charged, dangerous. Darius felt the tide turn in real time. The room that had mocked him laughed at him, mistaken him for staff, now tilted toward his side. Not out of sudden enlightenment, but because courage is contagious. He had broken the seal. Truth had leaked into the air, and everyone was inhaling it whether they wanted to or not. Victoria slammed her palm against the table. "You're all fools," she snapped. "This man is manipulating you. He is rewriting history for his own gain." But her voice sounded smaller now, shrill against the rising current. The room no longer bent to her tone. Charles Sr. tried next, voice weary but sharp. "We built this country's ports. We built its commerce. Do you think one speech can undo centuries of contribution?" Darius finally spoke. "No. But it can expose the cost of it." His words were quiet, but the microphones gave them gravity. "Your contribution wasn't free. It was extracted from workers who were silenced, from innovators who were erased, from families who will never sit in these chairs. And when anyone asked why, you called it ambition. You called it business. But it was theft." The applause returned, louder this time, breaking across the room like surf. A journalist shouted, "Mr. Cole, are you planning legal action?" Darius looked at her, then at the Langstons, then back to the crowd. "This isn't about courtrooms tonight. It's about seeing clearly. Once you see, you can't unsee. Once you hear, you can't unknow. The real trial starts tomorrow, with every investor, every donor, every partner who has to decide if silence is still profitable." The energy in the ballroom shifted. The Langstons had always been the sun around which the room orbited, but now gravity had tilted toward Darius. Even those who still feared the family's reach could feel it. Power was slipping from their grip. A celebrity near the back table raised his phone deliberately, speaking to his millions of followers in real time. "This is history," he said to the camera. "This is what it looks like when truth finally climbs on stage." Phones chimed with push notifications. News outlets posting excerpts of the leaked documents, screenshots of the LED wall, clips of Darius's speech, Langston dynasty accused of exploitation. Whistleblower files rock billionaire family. CEO cancels $900 million deal live at gala. Even the orchestra, stranded with instruments in hand, seemed to know they were part of something larger. One cellist quietly set his bow down and clapped, defying the conductor's attempt to hush him. The sound was joined by another, then another, until the stage itself became a rhythm of defiance. Darius stood straighter. The humiliation of earlier, the laughter, the "just here to entertain" line, felt distant, almost like a memory that belonged to someone else. He hadn't erased it, he had transformed it. But as the applause grew, as the room cracked further from the Langston's orbit, a ripple of urgency swept through the crowd. Staff moved briskly along the walls, whispering into earpieces, checking phones. Tiana's text arrived. "Tiana, outside. Hundreds gathering at Langston HQ. Protest signs. Chants already. News choppers overhead. It's spreading." Darius's stomach tightened. He had expected fallout articles, boardroom debates, investor panic, but protests. That quickly. The story wasn't just a headline anymore. It was a fire leaping fences. The Langstons saw it too. Charles Sr.'s face drained further, his hands trembling on his cane. Victoria's mask shattered completely. Her eyes darted toward the exits. Charles Jr. muttered into his phone, pacing like a caged animal. The ballroom erupted again, but now the noise was no longer contained within marble walls. It was colliding with chants echoing just blocks away, chants that would be broadcast before the night ended. For the first time in their gilded lives, the Langstons weren't fighting to control a room. They were fighting to contain a world. A voice from the mezzanine shouted down, "Breaking crowds are outside the Langston headquarters right now. Thousands. And they're not leaving." The shout from the mezzanine, "Thousands outside Langston headquarters," hit the ballroom like a second explosion. Phones lit across the tables, news alerts chiming in a discordant chorus. Screens showed footage already streaming live. Crowds swelling in the streets, hand-painted signs raised high. "Not your symbol. Justice has receipts. Langston live." The Langstons, who had mastered the art of owning the narrative for generations, were watching it slip from their hands in real time. Charles Jr. gripped his phone so tightly his knuckles bleached. "Tell security to block the feed," he hissed, turning to Victoria. "Get our lawyers on. We'll freeze it in court." But Victoria's phone buzzed non-stop, one notification bleeding into the next. She scanned the screen, her face draining. "It's too late," she whispered. "Stock already tanking. Langston Renewables down 7% in the last 10 minutes. Charles Sr. staggered slightly, his cane slipping before he caught himself. Rage flashed across his face, but underneath it, something else. Fear. For decades, fear had been a tool he wielded. Now it was in his eye. Darius didn't move from the podium. He watched the dynasty unravel in front of him, not with gloating, but with a quiet recognition. Empires don't collapse in silence. They collapse with noise, phones buzzing, headlines churning, crowds chanting. Tonight was proof. The MC's voice faltered, desperate to restore control. "Ladies and gentlemen, please, please, let's return to..." No one listened. The gala had dissolved into a stock market floor, each table its own panic station. Investors whispered frantically. Donors backed away from the Langston table, as though corruption might stain them by proximity. The same people who had laughed at Darius hours earlier now avoided even brushing against the dynasty's shadow. A guest at the back, an investment banker with silver hair and a reputation for surviving scandals, rose to his feet. "I'm withdrawing my firm's participation in the Langston deal. Effective immediately," he announced, his voice sharp, cutting through the chaos. "We will not be associated with deception." It was the first domino. Others followed. A woman in a navy gown declared her charity was severing ties. A hedge fund CEO announced, into a live camera feed, that his board was convening an emergency session to reevaluate Langston Holdings. The cascade accelerated until it was undeniable. The Langstons weren't just humiliated, they were radioactive. Victoria's composure cracked fully. "Do you all hear yourselves?" she cried. "One man tells a sob story, and you throw away decades of partnership? This is mob hysteria. You're smarter than this. But no one answered. No one wanted to be the last voice defending a crumbling throne. Darius's phone buzzed against his chest again. He slid it from his pocket, shielded it in his palm. Tiana. Messages pouring in, Twitter exploding, hashtags climbing worldwide, people calling you hope, read a few when you can. He tapped open one. A high school student had written, "I'm the only black kid in my honors program. Teachers tell me to tone it down. Tonight I saw Darius Cole, not tone it down. Thank you." Another, "My father lost his patents in the 90s to a bigger firm. He died thinking his ideas died too. Tonight he lives in your words." Another, "I clean offices in Midtown. Tonight I saw a man tell billionaires what I whisper to myself when no one listens. We're not props. We're not lucky. We're worth more." The words sank into him like anchors and wings at once, pulling him deeper into gravity, while lifting him into something larger than himself. The humiliation he had carried his entire life felt lighter, almost transfigured. He hadn't erased it. He had given it purpose. Meanwhile, across the ballroom, the Langston's empire trembled. News tickers reported in real time. Langston Global shares tumble 15%. Regulators expected to open inquiry. Whistleblower files under review. Charles Jr. bellowed into his phone. "Sell what you can. I don't care if it's pennies, just move it." His desperation was broadcast to every lens in the room. Eleanor sat rigid, her diamond necklace glinting like iron around her throat. "We will survive this," she said quietly, to no one in particular, as though sheer declaration might hold up the collapsing walls. But even she didn't sound convinced. Reporters swarmed the Langston table, questions cutting through their polished veneer like scalpels. "Did you authorize the ambassador plan? Did the foundation funnel hush money? Will you resign from your boards?" Their silence, once a tool of control, now condemned them. Darius's gaze swept the room. He saw rival CEOs nodding at him, not as competitors but as reluctant allies. Politicians leaned forward, suddenly eager to be photographed on the right side of history. Even celebrities, once glued to the Langstons for clout, now angled themselves toward him, phones raised to capture his every word. The balance of power had shifted, and yet something in his chest tightened. Because power shifts don't stay still. They move again, sometimes in ways more dangerous than before. His phone buzzed once more, a new message flashing on screen. "Unknown number. You think they were the only ones? Look closer at your own house." He frowned, scrolling down. Another message followed. "Unknown number. Not everyone in Coal Dynamics is loyal. Check your board before you celebrate." A chill slid through him. Betrayal? From inside? He hadn't expected that. Not tonight. Not from the family he had built his company with. He looked up, scanning the ballroom, but no face revealed itself. His board members sat scattered, composed, unreadable. Annika Rhodes caught his gaze from across the room, but her expression was impossible to decipher. Support, warning, or something else. A celebration around him. The applause, the chants rising from outside. The collapse of the dynasty suddenly felt like a stage set with cracks underfoot. Victory was close, but danger had already slipped into the wings. As headlines blared the Langstons' downfall, Darius's phone buzzed again with the words that froze him in place. "The betrayal isn't coming. It's already done." The message on his phone glowed like a flare in the dark. "The betrayal isn't coming. It's already done." Darius felt the words burn into him, sharper than any insult the Langstons had hurled. He gripped the podium a little tighter, steadying himself against the sudden tilt of the room. Around him, the ballroom pulsed with noise, reporters shouting, donors whispering, investors recalculating. But inside his chest, the sound narrowed to a thin, suffocating silence. He lifted his gaze. Across the room, Annika Rhodes's eyes were fixed on him. She didn't look away. For a moment, Darius wondered if she was the warning or the wound, but her expression gave nothing, only that unshakable stillness she carried into every meeting. Another buzz. Another message. Unknown number. Board member signed side agreement with Langstons. Terms included forcing leadership change after deal. Already filed. Check filings before you speak again. His breath stilled. Someone from inside Coal Dynamics, someone he had trusted, had sold him out. The realization cut deeper than the Langstons' jeers ever could. The humiliation from strangers was one thing. Betrayal from family was another. He scanned the tables. His board members, scattered among the guests, wore the practiced masks of corporate neutrality. Leonard Miles, his CFO, hunched over his phone, thumbs moving. Anita Grayson, operations head, whispered to someone off stage. And there at the far right, Victor Hayes, one of his earliest investors, his face stiff, jaw tight, eyes deliberately avoiding Darius's. Victor. The man who had written the first real check for Cole Dynamics. The man who had introduced Darius to half of Wall Street. The man who once toasted him as the future. The betrayal landed heavy. His phone buzzed again. Tiana. It's Hayes. Just confirmed. He signed proxy papers with Langston's. They want you out. Trying to push you into symbolic chair role after the merger. Darius closed his eyes for half a beat.
Yeah.
It all made sense. The hesitation in meetings, the advice to smooth things over with the Langstons, the insistence on compromise. He hadn't been cautious. He had been laying the ground. The sting wasn't just strategic. It was personal. Hayes had been there when Evelyn died. He'd sent flowers, stayed at the funeral. He had called Darius son. Now he was holding a knife. The doubts rushed in like floodwater. Had he moved too fast tonight? Should he have waited, negotiated, played the long game? What if he had doomed the company, the employees, the contracts, the schools depending on their software? Maybe the Langstons had been right. Maybe this was arrogance dressed as courage. For the first time that night, the weight of doubt pressed heavier than the lights above him. And then, through the storm of thoughts, his mother's voice returned, quiet but immovable. They can take your money, but never your name. He could almost see her, apron dusted with flour, exhaustion lining her face after a double shift, but eyes burning with that same fire she'd handed down to him. He remembered her saying it the night the landlord threatened eviction, the night he confessed that he felt invisible, the night he thought he'd never climb out of the silence Atlanta had wrapped him in. They can take your money, Evelyn had whispered, but never your name. The words steadied him. He opened his eyes and breathed, deeply, deliberately. Betrayal hurt, but betrayal also clarified. It reminded him who he was, and who he wasn't. He wasn't a decoration. He wasn't an ambassador. He wasn't a story to be sunset by. He was Darius Cole, and his name meant something. He leaned into the microphone again, voice even, gaze unshaken. There are people in this very room who thought partnering with corruption would protect them, he said, who thought I wouldn't find out. To them I say, I was underestimated my whole life, but I always find out. A murmur shot through the room. Heads turned, eyes darted. Suspicion spread like ink in water. Victor Hayes shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening further. Darius let the silence sharpen. Then he spoke again. To those who betrayed me, understand this. You may control votes on paper, but you don't control the people who are watching tonight. And you don't control the truth. You can strip a man of titles. You can take his contracts, but you cannot erase his name. The applause that broke out wasn't polite this time. It was defiant. People stood, clapping, some even cheering. What had begun as one man's humiliation was now a collective refusal to be silent. Victor Hayes remained seated, unmoving, his face hard, but his stillness was its own confession. Cameras panned to him, catching the contrast. The betrayer in his chair, the betrayed standing tall. Darius stepped back from the podium. His voice dropped softer, meant more for the people beyond the ballroom than those inside it. This isn't just about me. It's about every person who was ever told to be grateful for scraps. Every person erased from history books. Every voice silenced so that dynasties could call themselves destiny. Tonight, that ends. The room erupted again. But even as applause filled the air, even as cameras zoomed closer, even as the Langstons' empire trembled on live broadcast, Darius felt the shadow of the betrayal linger. Hayes wasn't finished. The Langstons weren't finished. The fight wasn't just outside. It was inside too. Tiana's next message buzzed into his phone. Tiana, press already asking for official statement. Media camped outside. They're calling it the reckoning. You need to address them. We'll set up in 15. Darius slipped the phone back into his pocket. A press conference. The moment when everything he had said tonight would either cement into history or collapse under scrutiny. He glanced once more across the ballroom. Hayes's face was stone. Anita's eyes were steady. The Langstons whispered furiously into their phones. The crowd chanted, half rally, half riot. Darius exhaled, the weight settling into resolve. He couldn't control betrayal. He couldn't erase corruption. but he could decide how he carried his name through it. And tomorrow or tonight, that would matter more than anything. Darius straightened his suit, eyes firm, and whispered to himself as he stepped off the dais. Time to face the world. The press conference was waiting, and it would change everything. They moved fast. Tiana led him through a side corridor lined with framed donor plaques, and into a secondary ballroom, hastily converted into a press room. Black drape backdrop, 2 flags, a collapsible lectern that creaked when you touched it. Cables laced the carpet like veins. Cameras blinked awake. Mics from a dozen outlets crowded the podium with their little phone logos. Anika checked sightlines. Security hovered at the doors, wary but no longer hostile. The air itself felt charged, like the second before rain. Jonah waited off stage in a server's jacket, tray tucked under his arm, as if he'd forgotten to put it down. When he caught Darius's eye, he straightened, the tremor in his hands held at bay by will alone. Tiana stepped close, voice low. "We'll stream to every platform," she said. "Press packet is queued. Benton files, Simone timeline, OSHA data, the ambassador deck, and flowcharts for Grantham Beacon. I've also got a sworn statement. Resignation letter just came in from a Langston compliance attorney." "On record?" Darius asked. "Name attached," she said. "He's here." Darius followed her glance to a man near the riser. Late 40s, pale, exhausted, clutching a folder like a life preserver. He nodded once, a man unhooking himself from a machine that had fed him for years. "Ready?" Tiana asked. Darius looked at the sea of lenses, at the jittering hands of interns, tapping headlines into the world, at Jonah's white-knuckle grip on a cheap tray. He thought of his mother's kitchen, the hiss of a radiator that never warmed, the soft authority in her voice. He stepped to the lectern. "Good evening," he said. The microphones made his voice sound both intimate and enormous. "We're live," a producer called from the pit, a red tally-like glow. "I'll make a statement," Darius said. "I'll take questions, and I will release documents in full, not summaries. No NDAs, no edits. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to read." A forest of pens froze over notepads. He didn't waste breath. First, Dr. Harold Benton. The LED screens flanking the room, lit with the grayscale photo. Narrow tie, crowded equations, a life's work packed into rectangles of chalk. In 1978, Benton proposed a load balancing system to a consortium funded by Langston Maritime. Months later, the system appeared under a different name. He sued. The case was sealed. A shell company, Grantham Beacon, routed settlement money, while the foundation took a tax deduction for a gift to a related entity. Receipts are in your inbox. He let that sit just long enough to sting. Second. Simone Hart, he said. The screen changed to a bright, hopeful conference snapshot inkjet banner. Borrowed monitor. 2014. A control schema for distributed grids. A cease and desist letter chilled her funding. 2 years later, language nearly identical to her white paper was patented under a Langston subsidiary. She left tech. She teaches high school. Her original draft, the patent excerpt, and investor emails are in your packet. Third, he said, voice level. Labor. Port warehouses. Night shift quotas that spike where the darkest hands work. Injury reports undercounted. Internal memos that script PR to sidestep questions. See OSHA summaries and emails on page 7 through 14. He felt the room's breath change. Half disbelief, half vindication. Reporters glanced at their phones as attachments pinged in. A chorus of vibrations hummed. And finally, he said, eyes steady. The plan for me. The screen flipped to Annex K. Ambassador transition. Bullets glowed with their own arrogance. Phase rebrand. Title sunset. Leverage aspirational arc. This is how you turn a person into decor. This is how you ask for genius. And rent a face. Hands shot up. He nodded to the reporter who had started the avalanche in the gala. 2 minutes ago, she said, we received an email from a Langston compliance attorney who resigned tonight. He's here. Will he speak? The man with the folder stepped forward. Every step a choice. My name is Peter Ash, he said, voice tight. I have worked in-house for 8 years. I raised concerns about Benton records and settlement structures. I was told to focus on optics. Tonight, I resign. My sworn statement is with your teams and with the State Attorney General. He handed a copy to Tiana, who passed it to the front row. An old ritual made suddenly holy. Another hand. Mr. Cole, critics will say you're grandstanding, that this is a feud, not a fact pattern. Darius didn't soften. There is a file room, he said. There are names. There are dates. There are payments. If truth is grandstanding, we've built the wrong stage. A third hand sharp. Are you worried about retaliation? Lawsuits? Your investors? I'm worried about silence, he said. I've lived with retaliation for existing. We can survive lawsuits. We cannot survive calling theft ambition. From the riser's edge, Jonah shifted, then lifted his hand like a kid in a classroom he never got to feel safe in. Sir? He said, voice small. Can I? Darius nodded. Jonah stepped to a side mic, set the tray down with a clatter that somehow dignified the moment. My name is Jonah Reese, he said. I worked in compliance for Langston. They reassigned me when I flagged injury numbers. Tonight I served drinks, because speaking up made me invisible. Mr. Cole didn't know I was going to say this, but I won't be anonymous while you all read about me. He swallowed, eyes bright. The documents you have are real. I pulled them. If anything happens to me, this is my face. This is my name. He looked at the cameras like they were people who could protect him. The room didn't breathe. A few reporters said quietly, "Thank you." He stepped back, shoulders squaring as if the simple act of saying his name had given it weight again. A rival outlet tried a counterpunch. Mr. Cole, what about your Community Access Fund's past consultant indictment? We cooperated, he said. Books are public, money recovered. We didn't seal a case and call it generosity. Will you seek damages? Another asked. We'll seek accountability, he answered. Damages look backward. Restitution looks forward. He nodded once toward Tiana, who tapped her tablet. The screen shifted to a simple slide. The Benton Hart Fellowship. Cole Dynamics will seed a fund to support engineers from communities usually mined for talent and discarded for credit. We'll also sponsor medical support for injured port workers who were denied claims. If the Langstons want to match it, they can. If not, we'll do it without them. The unexpected twist wasn't his announcement. It was the audible release of held breath from the press bench, as if some coil inside the room had loosened because action had finally followed accusation. A final hand shot up from the back, the questioner's voice edged and fishing. Are you angry, Mr. Cole? He didn't pretend otherwise. Yes, he said. I'm angry that I was invited to be a symbol so someone else could stay a secret. I'm angry for Dr. Benton and Ms. Hart and every worker whose name never appears in a report. But anger is a tool, not a home. I'm gonna build with it. Do you fear being blackballed? A business anchor asked. I've been blackballed since I learned to pronounce my own worth, he said. We mistake invitations for acceptance. I'm done mistaking. A murmur of assent worked through the reporter's professionals trained to watch, not agree, unable to fully hide it. He closed his folder. The deal is dead, he said, each word clean. Cole Dynamics will not enter partnerships that require me to trade my name for someone else's comfort. The documents are public. The microphones are yours. He touched the lectern once, a quiet thank you to the object that had carried the weight of new truth. To the kids watching, you are not a prop. Don't let any room convince you otherwise. He stepped back. Tiana's eyes shone, but her jaw was set like a person who both believed and planned. Anika offered the smallest nod forward. They turned to leave. The first clap struck the air like a single bell. Then another. Then a wave. Hands rising. Reporters standing. Camera operators clapping one palm against the handle. Security joining because there are moments when job descriptions become too small. It grew until it had a sound you could feel under your ribs. He didn't bow. He didn't smile. He just let it pass over him. An answer to a question first asked in a 6th grade classroom. In an Atlanta apartment. In a ballroom. Where laughter had been the price of entry. He took one step off the riser, then another, the applause swelling into something that didn't need mics to be heard. As Darius crossed the threshold, leaving the lights for the hallway's dim hush, the room behind him erupted, not in laughter this time, but in applause that chased him into the corridor and out toward whatever waited next. The echo of applause still lingered in Darius's chest as he stepped out of the hotel and into the crisp Manhattan night. The city was alive in ways that had nothing to do with chandeliers or gala music. Car horns blared, streetlights buzzed faintly, steam rose from manhole covers, protest chants pulsed blocks away, carried by the wind, raw, unpolished, uncontainable. He loosened his tie and walked. No entourage, no cameras this time, just a man moving through the city that once treated him like it didn't see him at all. The night air smelled of exhaust and roasted peanuts from a vendor still working the corner. He remembered being 12, standing on streets just like this, counting coins in his palm, calculating whether he could afford a bag of those same peanuts without cutting into bus fare. His mother's voice, threaded through memory, "Money is paper. Your name is the story they can't burn." Back then he thought she was comforting herself. Tonight he knew she had been giving him armor. He passed a group of sanitation workers on break, leaning against their truck. One of them lifted a phone. "That's him," the man whispered, loud enough to carry. Another worker straightened, gave Darius a nod. Nothing flashy, just respect. Darius returned it, a quiet acknowledgement, no autographs, no spectacle, just recognition. On the corner, a bodega door jingled. A teenager stepped out, earbuds dangling, eyes catching on him. "Yo, are you?" The kid trailed off. Unsure whether to believe his eyes, Darius smiled faintly. "Keep studying," he said. "Whatever they tell you can't do, do it anyway." The boy grinned, clutching his backpack tighter like it had just grown heavier with possibility. Every block seemed to echo pieces of his past. The pawn shop where his mother once hawked her wedding band to pay rent. The cracked sidewalk where he tripped running to a library job interview, knees bleeding, dress shirt too big. The subway entrance where he had once overheard two men say, "He's smart, but he'll burn out. Black boys always do." They were wrong. Tonight wasn't about a contract or a boardroom. Tonight was proof that a cycle could break in real time, that humiliation could be transmuted into truth, that silence could finally fracture under the weight of one voice refusing to bow. His phone buzzed again, but not with panic now, with waves of messages. Teachers asking if he would speak to their students, workers thanking him for naming what they'd lived, a patent holder's widow saying, "You gave my husband's name back." One stood out. "Unknown number. I'm sorry. I chose wrong. But you reminded me what a name means. Hayes. The man who betrayed him." Darius read the message twice, then slid the phone back into his pocket. Forgiveness was complicated, but clarity wasn't. Hayes would live with his choice. Darius would live with his. He turned down a narrow block in Harlem, the neighborhood humming with late-night music and open windows. Here the skyline didn't press down the same way. It rose like possibility. He stopped outside a mural, a black boy with a crown tilted on his head, spray-painted words beside him. "We are not tokens. We are architects." He stood there staring. He could have been that boy, lost under the weight of laughter in a classroom, or dismissal in a meeting. He could have been bent, erased, silenced. But he wasn't. A voice broke his reflection. "Mr. Cole?" An older woman with grocery bags paused on the sidewalk. Her eyes softened. "My grandson watched you tonight. He said, 'Grandma, I want to be him. I just wanted to say thank you.'" Darius's throat tightened. He nodded. Words lodged somewhere behind his ribs. Tell him not to be me," he said finally. "Tell him to be himself. That'll be more than enough." She smiled and walked on. He kept moving, past brownstones and corner stores, past kids still laughing too loud on stoops, past everything that had once told him no but had, in its own way, prepared him to say yes to himself. In the distance, screens on buildings still flickered with headlines. Langston Dynasty rocked by scandal. Cole Dynamics CEO redefines power. Names rise. Names fall. Tonight proved which ones endure. As he crossed into a quieter street, he thought back to that ballroom hours earlier. How humiliation had settled on him like a weight. How laughter had tried to shrink him. And he thought of how it ended. With applause. Not because he had won a deal, but because he had refused to sell his dignity for one. The $900 mega figure that once loomed like salvation felt small now. Paper. Ink. Numbers that could rise and fall in hours. But dignity, that was the currency that didn't depreciate. He paused, staring at the pavement under a street lamp. It was cracked, uneven, but it held him, just like the city, just like the journey. His mother had been right. They could strip his company, tarnish his contracts, conspire behind closed doors. But tonight the world had learned his name. Not as a token, not as a prop, not as an ambassador.
As Darius Cole.
A name unbroken. He drew a breath that felt larger than the night itself, lifted his chin, and kept walking, not toward a gala, not toward applause, but toward a future where silence would never again be the price of entry. What is truly priceless? The deal you sign or the dignity you protect? And if Darius's fight moved you, If you've ever felt the weight of silence forced on you, don't let this story end here. Raise your voice,